All right, let me talk about this Chevalier movie. This guy was half French, half black, mulatto, violinist. He was good. He was like another Mozart, or he was better than Mozart. And it showed you his whole life and the anti-black racism he went through. And you would think back in those times in France, you would think France a little bit more liberal than the United States when it comes to black people, but they own slaves too in France. So that shows you back in the 1700s, you couldn't go nowhere in the world and people not practice anti-black racism. So we do live in a global system of white supremacy, because all these other countries own slaves besides the United States. The French own slaves, Britain owned slaves, Spain owned slaves, Portuguese owned slaves, everybody owned black slaves. Even the United States owned slaves too at that time. So you couldn't go nowhere in the world and not see these other countries practicing anti-black racism. So it is true that we do live in a system of white supremacy, global white supremacy. Now this guy was one of the greatest violinists ever. He was better than Mozart. He got too caught up with these French folks, thinking that he was French, but he wasn't all the way French. He was half black. He was a mulatto, and they tried to put him in his place. He got so comfortable being around these people, he forgot that he was black, and these people put him in his place. He was hanging with the Queen of France, and they were hanging out together and stuff like that. He got to go to all these good parties and mess with all these French white women, and lay up with all these French white women. Shit, he was the belle of the ball until his blackness came into play, and he had to humble himself, and he understood the system we live in. He understood white supremacy and racism. But early part of the movie, he was just having his fun. He was, slavery was abolished at that time. So, the black people was in France. They was having, they got to move around and not have the same stuff that was going on in the United States. They got to move around just a little bit, just a tad bit more freely than the black people in the United States. Because they, back in the 1700s and 1770, whenever this took place, they had slavery back in the United States, and black people couldn't move around like that. They had some free black people, but they had mostly slaves. But Chevalier, he was hanging around with the Queen of England, not the Queen of England, Queen of France. They was going to operas and stuff like that. He was having a good time. Then he tried to take over the opera of Paris, and everybody started turning on him. There was this one opera singer that was trying to lay up with him, and he denied her. And then she ended up, stabbing him in the back because he didn't sleep with her. I forgot what her name was, but at the end of the movie, she was calling him all kind of monkeys and subhuman, but she wanted to sleep with this dude. She got mad because he turned it down, and that's what really stuck with me. I'm like, damn, this woman went up there and did all this stuff because the dude wouldn't sleep with her. And he even said that in the movie. He's like, why are you mad at me? Because I wouldn't bed you? She goes up there like, you wanted to lay up with this dude, but he all kind of monkeys and subhuman, and come on now, really? Come on now. This shows you how insidious white supremacy is, even back in those days. This woman wanted to lay up with this dude, knowing he was half black, and she wouldn't even care about him being no monkey or being no subhuman at that time when she was trying to hook up with him. And that right there really pissed me off about the movie. But what really pissed me off about this movie was because this dude thought he was, he was French. He was a regular white Frenchman. And he wasn't. And even his own mama told him that, like, hey man, you losing, you just a tourist. And these people do not care for you. These people do not have your back. He thought these French people had his back, and they didn't have his back. He thought the Queen of France had his back, and she showed him that, shit, you just a Negro. So, then he had a little affair with this woman who already was married, and she said some crazy racist shit too, and he was just, I guess he ignored it or something because she was so sexy. A lady played by Samara Weaving. And she had said some racist stuff early before they even started hooking up, and she was telling him why he ain't hook up with a black person, with a Negro, and got married, because it was illegal for a black person to get married to a French person in France. It was illegal all over the world for a black person to get married to somebody who was non-black. And you know, she ended up liking this dude. They ended up having sex while her husband was away, and she ended up got pregnant by this dude, and her husband came back, and she had the baby, and the baby came out black. Then the dude, her husband, went and killed the baby and stuff like that. I'm like, oh my God. Oh man, back in those times, you couldn't get no divorce like that, So basically those times, the man owned the woman. So now she wanted to be with old boy, the Chevalier dude. She would have been with him, but they wouldn't have been, free. They would have to go through all this anti-black racism, and she didn't want to go through that. She even told him that. She's like, there's nowhere in the world where we can go, and be together. And she was right. There's nowhere in the world back in those times where they can go and be together. Nowhere in those 1700s, 1770, I believe, 1770 something around when this stuff happened. So they had the French, the Revolution. So it was around that time, and they showed, people riding in the streets and stuff like that. So, like I said, this was a good movie, and I give it a 10 out of 10. I enjoyed this movie, and it showed you, how deep white supremacy is. And I like movies like that, to wake people up, to show people back in those times, black people wasn't free. It was hard to live in this world. And even in different countries, some people think, the racism was just United States. It was all over the world at that time. It still is. And that shows you how racist and insidious and degenerate these French people were back in that time. And, it was heartbreaking to see this guy not get his shine, because he was good at playing the violin. He was the best violin player. He was better than the white people, better than the French folks, better than Mozart. And it was sad that this man didn't get his flowers. They did try to give him his flowers, but it didn't last that long, because he tried to transcend racism. He couldn't do it. He thought he could, but he couldn't do it. And it's sad how he ended up losing his spot. He got mad and started getting drunk and started acting a fool, which he shouldn't have did. He was cussing the queen out, and the French folks are like, you need to learn your place and stay in your place, stay as a subhuman Negro. But that's what made me mad about the movie too. This dude got drunk and started acting a fool. I'm like, dude, come on now. The world we living in, man. Come on, man. All he had to do was just chill. Just chill, sit back, and enjoy whatever little lavish lifestyle he had, because anybody else black wouldn't enjoy that. And one of the guy that he was messing with his wife, he even told him that, was like, hey, if you was in another country, you wouldn't be able to walk around in nice clothes and walk around and talk to French people any way you want to. He told him that. And I guess his name was Marquis something. I forgot what his guy's name was, but he did tell him that. And he was right. And that's the truth. Because if he was in the United States, he wouldn't be walking around like that. So he was right. And all he had to do was just sit back and chill. And that's the only thing I didn't like about the movie too, man. This dude got drunk and wanted to act a fool and getting all in his feelings, knowing, exactly what world we living in. Come on now. 1700 France. Come on, dude. They had slaves. They all over the world, man. The world we living in, and he just decided that, he thought he could transcend racism, and that was sad. Till he got his rude awakening, till he got his white supremacy wake-up call. And then at the end of the movie, he wanted to start being revolutionary. I'm like, dude, that took you to see that? You should already, his mom was trying to tell him already, dude, you just a tourist. You should already been on a revolutionary tip. You wanted to hang out with all the French white folks, think you was white, think you was a real true Frenchman, and you're not. It's another thing that made me mad about this movie at the end. This dude wanted to be all revolutionary at the end. He should have been revolutionary at the beginning. Now, why you wait till these French folks turn their back on you for you to be revolutionary? No, man, you should have already been on that. That's another thing I ain't like about this dude. He should have already been on the revolutionary tip instead of sitting there, trying to kick it with these French folks, knowing they just insidious white supremacists, call them subhuman and monkeys and all this stuff. I'm surprised they ain't even used the N-word on this dude. I'm surprised they ain't even spoke that to him. I guess they just said that for America. But like I said, I like this movie. It showed you how deep racism and white supremacy is outside the United States. Some people think these French folks ain't racist. Some people think some of these other countries are not racist like America, and they really are. They about the same. So it shined a light on the white supremacy in France at that time. But that's been Mo the Pimp God. All hail to the Pimp God. I give this movie a 10 out of 10. Very much worth a watch. I can sit back and watch this movie again. It has some good classical music. I enjoyed his shows when he was playing the violin. He can play the hell out that violin. But I enjoyed this movie. But that's been my review of Chevalier. I think that's how you pronounce it. 10 out of 10. I'm a holler.